Hey listeners, this is Peter, and welcome back to the History Shorts. This humble show is brought to you by the Podcast Republic, your ultimate listening app. Discover and subscribe to thousands of podcasts from around the globe, yours truly included, and all in one place. Download Podcast Republic now, available on Google Play and the Apple App Store. Today on History Shorts. World War II produced no shortage of stories about survival, but very few gripped the American public quite like the ordeal of Eddie Rickenbacker and that of his crew lost at sea in 1942. Rickenbacker wasn't just another name in the papers. He was the American ace of World War I, 26 victories in the air, the Medal of Honor, and a reputation for unbreakable nerve. By the 1940s, he had become something of a living legend, part hero, part symbol, and that old-school American daring that the nation liked to believe still ran in its veins. When the Second World War came, Rickenbacker was already in his early 60s. He could have stayed home, basking in his fame and business success. He was running Eastern Airlines at the time. But this wasn't his style. Instead, he volunteered as a civilian advisor and morale booster, visiting bases, inspecting planes, and giving pep talks to airmen heading into combat. He wasn't wearing a uniform anymore, but he was still very much in the fight. And here is the rest of that story.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941,
it's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
In October of 1942, less than a year after Pearl Harbor, Rickenbacker was called to Washington for a special assignment. The War Department needed someone to hand-deliver an important message to General Douglas MacArthur, then stationed in the South Pacific. The orders were top secret, and Rickenbacker, trusted, patriotic, and famous enough to inspire troops along the way, was the ideal choice. So on October 20th, he boarded a B-17 Flying Fortress in Hawaii. The plane's pilot was Captain William Cherry, a capable and experienced flyer. Along for the mission were Rickenbacker's aide, Captain Hans Adamson, and the rest of the bomber's crew, 8 men in all. Their route would take them from Hawaii to Canton Island, then onward toward Australia. It was a long flight, but in wartime, long flights were routine. Except this one, of course. This one did not go as planned. Somewhere along the way, a small mechanical error set off a chain of events that nearly doomed them all. The plane's compass had been improperly calibrated, just enough to throw their navigation off by hundreds of miles. On the instruments, everything looked fine, but in reality, they were flying into an empty heart of the Pacific Ocean. Hours passed. The sun sank low, and the fuel gauges dropped toward empty. Finally, Captain Cherry faced the awful truth. They weren't going to make it. With no land in sight and no fuel to spare, he brought the plane down into the ocean's surface. The impact was violent. The massive bomber struck the waves, bounced, and then broke apart, disappearing beneath the sea in just minutes. But somehow, miraculously, every man on board made it out alive. They grabbed what they could, a few emergency rations, fishing gear, and 3 small inflatable life rafts, and then paddled away from the sinking wreckage. Now they were alone, hundreds of miles from the nearest island, surrounded by nothing but water and the sky. That first night was chaotic. The men were exhausted, disoriented, and in shock. But by morning, they took stock of what they had. 8 men, 3 rafts, a few oranges, some fishing line, and a pistol. That was pretty much it. No radio, no fresh water, no flares, just faith and Eddie Rickenbacker. Even though he was a civilian, Rickenbacker quickly took charge of the situation. It was all second nature to him, part commander, part taskmaster. He demanded discipline. The men would ration every bite of food, every drop of water. They would keep watch in shifts, stay calm, and conserve strength. Not everyone appreciated his style, however. Rickenbacker could be tough, blunt, irritable, and absolutely intolerant of any defeatist talk. But his leadership brought structure to the chaos. Tragedy struck early. Sergeant Alexander Kaczmarczyk, one of the crewmen, had been badly injured in the crash. Despite their efforts, he died a few days later. The men wrapped his body and then buried him at sea. The moment was very solemn, a reminder that the ocean they floated on could easily become their own grave. From then on, the days blurred together. The sun scorched them by day and the cold bit at night. They tried catching rainwater in makeshift containers, but the storms were unpredictable. Hunger gnawed at them constantly, and thirst was the real enemy here. Some men resorted to sipping seawater, which only made things worse. Their lips cracked, their skin blistered, and salt sores covered their bodies. Sharks, of course there were sharks, followed their rafts, their fins slicing through the waves like black knives. Every ripple made the men jump. There was no sound except the wind and the slap of water against rubber. By the end of the first week, the men were desperate. Then came the moment that would make their story legendary. It was the middle of a long, hot afternoon, one of those endless days when the horizon seemed to mock you. The men were lying silently in their rafts, half asleep, half delirious, when a lone seagull appeared out of nowhere. It circled above, then impossibly landed right on Eddie Rickenbacker's head. The men watched in disbelief. Rickenbacker sat perfectly still. Then in a single quick motion, he reached up and grabbed it. They killed the bird and divided the meat among the crew. It was the first real food they had in over a week. They used the insides of the bird as bait and to their amazement, actually caught fish. For the first time since the crash, they had some hope. For many of the men, especially Chaplain James Whitaker, the seagull was a sign from God. Rickenbacker himself was less overtly religious, but even he called it a miracle. In his later memoirs, he wrote that the bird had given them more than food. It had given them faith. The days stretched into weeks. The men drifted further and further from their intended course, carried by winds and currents that they couldn't control. Sometimes they spotted distant aircraft, but no one ever saw them. Their bright yellow rafts were just tiny dots against the vast Pacific. Rickenbacker kept the men focused, however. He made them repeat prayers, set routines, and forbade any talk of dying. His harshness became their discipline. One of the men later said, "We hated him at times, but we did need him." They endured blinding sun, sudden squalls, and nights so dark it felt like the stars themselves were closing in. Their bodies shrank from hunger. Their minds drifted between lucidity and delirium. At one point, Rickenbacker slipped into a near coma from dehydration, but when he awoke, he ordered the others to keep going, never to give in. 21 days would pass. 21 days of open sea, of death all around them, of hope dangling by the thread. The American newspapers back home had pretty much all decided that these guys were all dead. But then on November 13th, 1942, the United States Naval Patrol spotted movement near the Ellice Islands. The men were skinny, sun-blackened, and barely alive, but they had survived. When news reached home, the story exploded across America. Newspapers called it Rickenbacker's miracle. Radio hosts told the tale in breathless detail. Here was the old ace, the hero of the Great War, once again defying death and winning. In the middle of a brutal, uncertain war, Americans were hungry for stories just like this one. Rickenbacker became a symbol of resilience once again. Proof that courage and faith could carry a man through anything. The government quickly debriefed the survivors. The ordeal led to major improvements in survival gear, life rafts, and training for air crews flying over water. Future downed airmen would owe their lives in part to what Rickenbacker and his men had endured. For Rickenbacker himself, the experience became one more chapter in a life already packed with them. Born in 1890 to Swiss immigrants in Columbus, Ohio, he'd started out fixing cars before becoming one of America's first celebrity race car drivers. He competed in the early Indianapolis 500 races, set speed records, and brushed death more times than he could count. When the U.S. entered World War I, he volunteered, learned to fly, and became the country's most celebrated ace in the entire war. After the war, he turned his attention to commercial aviation, helping shape the future of flight as the head of Eastern Airlines. And then in his 60s, he found himself once again battling the elements, proving to the world, as one journalist put it, that Eddie Rickenbacker's engine may stall, but his spirit never does. Rickenbacker lived into his 80s, passing away in 1973. To the very end, he carried with him the lessons of those 21 days at sea: discipline, faith, and the absolute refusal to give up. He often said that the seagull, that single bird that appeared from nowhere, had saved not just his body, but his belief in something larger than himself. "There's no such thing as chance," he once told a newspaper. "There's only purpose, even when we can't see it yet." And that's the story of Eddie Rickenbacker, the indestructible man. Thanks for listening to History Shorts. If you want to read more about today's story, check out the sources, notes, and upcoming guest announcements. Visit www.historyshortspodcast.com or follow History Shorts Podcast on Facebook and X. Stay curious, and I'll talk to you all tomorrow.